Okay, we're back here in Nala. The shiur is dedicated once again Lilu Nishmas Rachalei Basar Chaim Tzvi, and I have once again my able assistant, Dr. Idil Avi.
Thank you, Rabbi Isaacson. Last time was very, very enlightening. I really appreciate your help with the laws of tying on Shabbos, and I felt that was very practical and useful. And my understanding is that today's topic is the law of sewing on Shabbos, Tofer.
That's right.
And I have to tell you that I don't do much sewing. So if you can impress upon me how sewing on Shabbos is something that's practically pertaining to me, I'll be very impressed. So please, by all means.
Okay, we'll try and do that. The truth of the matter is, the reason we selected sewing, Tofer, to do right after kosher is because these melachos have quite a bit to do with each other. They both have the commonality that you're taking two disparate items, and in the Melacha of kosher tying, you're going ahead and joining them together through a knot. In the Melacha of Tofer, you're joining them together through sewing, through a stitch or a series of stitches. What exactly is the difference then? Why do you need two separate melachos for these two different topics? So the Mefarshim explain that when it comes to the Melacha of Tofer, unlike tying knots, you create a bona fide unity between two disparate items. When you sew two garments together, you really create a bonding that where they become really one. Unlike when you tie knots and thereby bind two things together, then you're not really creating a unity. They still remain somewhat disparate, and that is the fundamental difference. Other Mefarshim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, alludes to the fact that when it comes to sewing, so what you do is you take these two disparate items, you join them together with a third medium, a third vehicle, such as a thread. That's the classic case, and that's going to be the quality of the Melacha of Tofer. For that reason, for example, we generally assume that not only is sewing part of this prohibition, but the prohibition will also include gluing. When you take that third medium, glue, or tape, the like, that will go ahead and stick together two separate items, make them into one, that also will be included in this prohibition of sewing on Shabbos. A few quick introductory remarks, just things that, some background information. The Gemara tells us that the Isser of Tofer only applies on a Doraisa level, on a Torah level, when you do a full two stitches. Two stitches. Now, what does that mean exactly, two stitches?
Okay.
So we'll have to demonstrate.
Okay,
maybe.
fine. So let me see. You know, it's funny. I brought the sewing kit. I rummaged around.
Okay, good.
So I brought it for you. You got the needle there?
Yeah, probably not going to pick this up on the video, but your classic case of two stitches means that
Can I donate my shirt?
Yeah, sure. You'll take your needle and you'll stick it in. That would be stitch number one when you're sticking it in, and then when you return it back so that the needle returns back to the side where it started, that's going to be your second stitch. So if you do that where it goes in and out, so that's going to be considered to be two stitches, and that's going to be the Doraisa prohibition of Tofer. Interestingly, the Gemara says if you just left that as is, it's not really going to last at all. It's just going to come out very quickly if you just make those two stitches, and therefore the Isser Doraisa, the Torah prohibition, only applies when you actually make a knot thereafter. When you actually tie the knot, then you're going to have the Torah prohibition. If you don't make that knot, you just do two stitches without the knot, then it's going to be a rabbinic prohibition, still prohibited. If you only do one stitch, you only go one way, so we assume you're not even binding those two items together whatsoever, and that's going to be permissible altogether.
Okay, what about a button on the shirt? Something like that.
So that's interesting. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in a response in the Tshuva, he discusses a lot of times you'll have this third medium that binds two together in a way that is meant to constantly open and close. In that sense, you really haven't unified in a permanent, or even, I wouldn't even call it a non-permanent manner, these two separate items. So when it comes to things like buttons, when it's always meant to open and close, you haven't really bound together these two parts of the garment, and therefore that's not going to be a prohibition of sewing on Shabbos. No problem.
So you mean buttoning a shirt is not a problem?
No problem at all.
But what about if the button then becomes loose, and I want to tighten the button onto the shirt?
So once you go ahead and do that, you have, let's say, a loose thread, and you're going to pull it fast so that the button now will stick, becomes tightened to the shirt. That the Shulchan Aruch is explicit that that's going to be usher and should certainly not be done on Shabbos.
Okay, can you think of more scenarios now that are similar with the needle and thread as far as that part of that type of putting things together that might apply on be practical?
Needle and thread. I'm not sure what you mean. What I do want to mention before we get to that, and you'll clarify what you're referring to, but when it comes to other manners of like button-like, permissible types of sewing or binding together, anything like a zipper, also, which is basically meant doesn't create a permanent bond at all.
Right.
Certainly going to be permissible.
Right.
Here you see I have a sneaker here.
I have Velcro here.
Velcro is going to be certainly permissible. It's meant to be opened and closed in that fashion. Does not create any permanent binding whatsoever, and that's 100% fine.
What about, you talked about gluing. What about stapling? I got this piece of paper. Stapling together?
So as we mentioned, Tofer will include any kind of binding together two items through a third medium. If it's done in a way that creates a unity between those two items, that is going to be the Torah prohibition of Tofer, and therefore, to staple together two items in that fashion is certainly going to be prohibited, definitely should be avoided.
You're not into that. Okay,
No.
so I just stapled that together, and then I have also this Scotch tape. That's not as permanent as a staple, is it, or it is? What do you say?
It's not as permanent. The Rambam, Maimonides, writes that a tolda, an ancillary prohibition, the